The alien market was busy that morning. Bright signs flashed in many colors. Different creatures from many planets were shouting, talking, and bargaining. The air was filled with the sound of engines from landing ships, the smell of hot metal, strange foods, and dusty wind. It was a place where everything had a price. Near the back of the market, where the lights were not so bright, a small alien girl stood quietly. She was standing inside a small fenced corner, separated from others. She was young, maybe 8 or 9 in human years. Her skin was soft silver blue and her big bright eyes looked tired. Her hair, long and thin, was tied loosely with an old ribbon around her wrist. That little ribbon was the only thing she owned. People passed by but didn't stop. They looked at stronger and older aliens who could work. They looked at tall warriors, smart-looking traders or helpers who could speak many languages. No one even asked the girl's name. Some looked at her, then quickly looked away. Others didn't notice her at all. The sun was already high in the sky and the heat was strong. The tent above her did little to protect her from it. The girl didn't cry. She had learned a long time ago that crying didn't change anything. Instead, she just wrapped her small arms around herself, trying to feel safe. The merchant who owned the space barely cared. He was a tall alien with green skin and golden eyes. He sat on a chair near the entrance, counting credits on his old tablet. Sometimes he shouted to attract buyers, but he never bothered to speak kindly to her. To him, she was just another name on his list, another product to sell. Around her, the market moved like a storm. A group of buyers came from the west gate. They were wearing fine clothes and walked with confidence. They pointed at other aliens, talking about prices. One of them laughed and said, "She's too small. She won't be useful." Another buyer shrugged. "Weak, look at her. Who would even take her?" The girl heard every word, even if they thought she couldn't understand. She lowered her head, staring at the dusty ground. She wasn't angry. She was used to those words. Every day it was the same. People passed. People judged. And then they left. The hours moved slowly. The heat made the air heavy. Some buyers bought others, some walked away, and some argued loudly over prices. The merchant became annoyed that no one was interested in the girl. He even tried lowering the price. Still, no one came. For a moment, a small hope rose in the girl's chest when a family stopped near her. A tall woman with silver hair bent down slightly and looked at her. The girl looked up with quiet hope. But the woman just smiled sadly, shook her head, and walked away. The girl's shoulders dropped again. Hope was like a small candle that kept blowing out. She remembered the day she arrived at this market. It was early morning. She had been holding her father's hand. But then everything changed. She was taken away and brought here, far from her home. Days turned into weeks. She had stopped counting how long she had been waiting. She didn't understand everything around her. She didn't know what the merchant was saying most of the time, but she understood the looks, the cold, judging, careless looks that told her she was unwanted. She wasn't tall. She wasn't strong. She wasn't valuable to them. A little wind blew through the market, lifting dust into the air. It carried the smell of cooked food, hot oil, and old metal. The girl closed her eyes for a moment. She imagined being somewhere else. She imagined the sound of her mother's voice. She imagined warm hands, a gentle hug, and a safe place. But when she opened her eyes, the noise of the market was still there. The merchant shouted again, louder this time. "Last chance. Small price. Someone take her. She's quiet, easy to manage." A group of alien soldiers walked by. They didn't even look at her. Another man came, took a quick glance, and waved his hand. "No, not interested." The girl's heart grew heavier. She sat down on the ground, pulling her knees to her chest. She didn't even try to stand anymore. The ribbon around her wrist slipped a little, and she held it tight. That ribbon was the only warm thing she had left, the only piece of her old life. Shadows started to grow longer as the sun moved down. The noise of the market softened a little as the busy hours passed. Most buyers had already left with what they wanted. The merchant leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Useless," he muttered to himself. "Nobody wants her. Maybe tomorrow, or never." The girl stared at the empty road in front of her. Her eyes didn't shine like before. It felt like the world had decided her future without even asking her. She didn't know what would happen next. Maybe she would stay here forever. Maybe she would be moved again. But at the edge of the market, something changed. A new ship had landed, small, old, with faded paint on its side. A human man stepped out slowly. He wasn't dressed like a rich buyer. His clothes were simple and dusty. His boots made a quiet sound as he walked on the metal floor. He looked around carefully, not in a hurry like the others. The girl didn't notice him at first. She was too tired to care, but the man's eyes stopped when they reached her. In a sea of flashing lights, loud voices, and expensive deals, his gaze fell on the quiet corner where she sat. Something about the way she held that ribbon caught his attention. He didn't know her. She didn't know him. But in that moment, something silent passed between them, a quiet spark in a noisy world. The merchant saw the man and sat up straight. Maybe, just maybe, this new visitor could be a buyer, but the man didn't rush forward. He stood still, watching the small girl from a distance. The girl slowly lifted her eyes and saw him. It was a small, simple moment. But for her, it was the first time that day someone had actually looked at her. Not like a thing, not like a number, but like a person. And though she didn't know his name, or why he was there, something inside her heart moved. For the first time in a long time, she felt noticed. The man who had just arrived at the market was named Daniel. He was a human pilot who worked alone, fixing and flying old cargo ships between distant colonies. His ship was small and plain with many scratches and old paint, but it was his home. He wasn't a rich man, and he wasn't looking to buy anything that day. Daniel had landed on the planet to buy spare parts for his ship. He didn't like crowded places, but the market was the only place where he could find what he needed. As he walked through the noisy crowd, his eyes scanned the shops. Vendors shouted prices in strange languages. Drones buzzed in the air carrying boxes. It was just another day in another busy place. But then he saw her. She was sitting at the back corner of the market, small and silent. Everyone else was moving, shouting, buying and selling, but she just sat there holding a ribbon on her wrist. Something about that quiet corner made him slow down. He felt something in his chest, something he couldn't explain. Daniel had seen many things in his life. He had traveled through war zones, carried cargo between dangerous systems, and watched people get lost in the chaos of the galaxy. But the way the girl was sitting, alone and forgotten, reminded him of a moment from his past. Years ago, when Daniel was young, he too had been left behind on a crowded station. Back then, no one had looked at him either. No one had reached out. That day had burned itself into his memory. So when he saw the girl, that feeling came back like a quiet voice in his heart. The merchant noticed Daniel watching and immediately jumped from his chair. "Hey, human!" the merchant called in a rough voice. "You want to buy something?" "Cheap price." "Good deal." Daniel didn't answer right away. He walked slowly closer to the corner, keeping his eyes on the girl. She lifted her head a little, unsure why this stranger was looking at her. Usually people turned away, but this man didn't. The merchant rubbed his hands together and grinned. "She's been here all day," he said. "Nobody wants her, but I give you special price. Quiet girl, easy to keep." Daniel knelt down to the girl's level. He didn't want to scare her. He saw the way she pulled her knees closer to her chest. He noticed how thin her arms were, how tired her eyes looked, and how tightly she held that ribbon. For a long second, he didn't say anything. He just looked into her eyes, not with pity, not like a buyer, but like someone who wanted to understand. She blinked, unsure what to do. No one had ever come this close without turning away. "Hey," Daniel finally said softly, his voice warm and calm. He didn't know if she understood human language, but he still spoke slowly. "Are you okay?" The girl didn't answer, but her eyes widened slightly. She had understood something, not the words maybe, but the kindness. The merchant leaned over the fence. "She doesn't talk much," he said, "but she's healthy. No problems. She's just quiet. Nobody wants quiet." Daniel didn't like the way the merchant spoke about her, like she was nothing more than a tool. He looked at her again, and in that moment his heart made a quiet decision before his brain could argue. He couldn't walk away. Not again. Not this time. "Can she walk?" Daniel asked. The merchant nodded quickly. Yes, she can walk. Strong enough." Daniel slowly stood and stretched his hand toward the girl, not touching her, just holding it out, open and patient. The girl froze, her heart beating faster. She didn't know this man. She didn't understand why he was different. But his hand didn't look like the others she had seen. It didn't look greedy or harsh. She stared at it for a long moment. Then her fingers twitched a little. The merchant noticed the small movement and quickly said, "You take her now, I give you discount. She's no trouble. She'll follow. Just sign here." He waved his tablet, already smelling profit. Daniel didn't look at the tablet. His eyes stayed on her. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe." He didn't know if she understood the words, but he hoped she could feel them. Finally, slowly, she lifted her small hand and placed it gently on his. Her fingers were cold. Her grip was weak. But it was a choice, a quiet yes. The merchant clapped his hands, excited. "Good, good. She wants to go. You sign here. Pay here." Daniel sighed, reached into his jacket and pulled out a small pouch of credits. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He paid without arguing. The merchant handed him the digital tag that released the fence. The gate opened with a soft sound. For the first time in weeks, the girl stepped out from behind the fence. The world outside felt bigger and brighter than she remembered. She didn't know where she was going, but she followed the human. Her small hand held onto his sleeve carefully, afraid it might all disappear like a dream. They walked slowly through the market. People looked at them as they passed. Some were confused. Some whispered to each other. "Why did he choose her?" one voice said. "She's useless," said another. But Daniel didn't care what they thought. He didn't even look at them. The girl tried to keep up with his steps. She didn't speak, but inside her chest, something tiny started to warm, a feeling she hadn't felt in a very long time. When they reached the outer gate of the market, Daniel stopped and turned around to look at her. The bright sunlight hit her face, making her squint. She was still holding the ribbon on her wrist tightly with one hand and his sleeve with the other. "You're safe now," Daniel said again. He didn't know her story. He didn't know her name. But something inside him knew this was the right thing. The girl didn't understand all the words, but she could feel something in his voice. It wasn't cold like the merchants. It wasn't distant like the buyers. It was steady and gentle. She blinked slowly. For the first time, she wasn't standing behind a fence. She was walking beside someone. Daniel guided her through the dusty road toward the landing platform where his ship was parked. It wasn't a big or fancy ship, but it was safe. The girl looked at it with quiet curiosity. Daniel opened the door and motioned for her to follow. She hesitated for a second, but his patient expression gave her courage. She climbed the small steps slowly. As the door closed behind them, the noise of the market disappeared. Inside the ship, it was quiet, warm. She stood near the entrance, unsure what to do, holding her ribbon with both hands. Daniel didn't rush her. He just said softly, "You can sit anywhere. You're safe." She didn't sit right away, but she looked around carefully. This was the first place in a long time that didn't feel cold. And for the first time, a soft thought grew in her heart. Maybe this is a beginning. The girl sat quietly in the corner of Daniel's small ship. The engines hummed softly, and the sunlight from the window made patterns on the floor. Everything smelled of metal, old oil, and dust from distant planets. She had never been in a place like this before. No fences, no shouting merchants, no strangers judging her, just quiet and space. Daniel was busy checking the ship's navigation system. He tapped buttons, adjusted levers, and examined screens. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. He knew she was watching, studying him, trying to understand the strange human who had stepped forward for her. At first, she didn't move. She clutched the ribbon on her wrist and peeked around. She had learned that being too curious could be dangerous, that moving too fast or showing too much hope could lead to disappointment. But there was something different about Daniel. He didn't rush her. He didn't force her to do anything. He just let her exist. Finally, after several minutes, she crawled a little closer. She touched the edge of the chair he was sitting on. He glanced at her, gave a small smile, and nodded. That simple gesture made her heart beat faster. It was the first time in weeks that someone had smiled at her just for being there. "Do you want something to eat?" Daniel asked softly. His voice was low but kind. She didn't answer. She didn't know the words. But she looked at the small package he held out. Bread from the market, soft and warm. She slowly took it with both hands and nodded slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show her he cared. As she ate, Daniel continued to work. Sometimes he glanced at her, making sure she was okay. He didn't ask her questions. He didn't demand explanations. He only offered what he could: safety, food, and a quiet presence. After a while, he set down his tools and motioned for her to come closer. "We'll need to leave soon," he said. "Can you walk to the cockpit?" The girl nodded hesitantly. She didn't speak, but her eyes followed him. She had never been in control of her own path before. Someone always decided for her. But now she felt like maybe she could make small choices, like stepping forward when Daniel asked. She walked carefully to the cockpit, gripping the railing as she moved. Her small steps made soft sounds on the metal floor. Daniel watched her closely, ready to help if she stumbled. But she didn't. She reached the seat and sat down quietly. Daniel fastened a few straps around her for safety and returned to his own station. "We're leaving the market behind," he said. "It's noisy there, full of people who don't see you. But out here in space you can breathe." The girl tilted her head. She didn't understand all the words, but she felt the meaning. Breathing, space, freedom. It was strange to think that someone could speak softly and make her feel safe at the same time. As the ship lifted from the platform, she looked out the window. The market shrank below, smaller and smaller. She saw the tiny figures of the other aliens moving in their busy world, unaware of her escape. She felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness for everything she had lost, and relief that she was no longer alone. Daniel noticed her staring. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're not alone anymore." She didn't answer. She just held the ribbon and watched the stars grow brighter outside. The galaxy stretched endlessly, and for the first time it seemed like there was a place where she could belong. Hours passed. Daniel guided the ship through quiet lanes between planets. The girl stayed near the cockpit, sometimes glancing at him, sometimes looking outside. She began to feel curiosity, small but real. The ribbon on her wrist felt less heavy. The weight of the market, of being unwanted, started to fade a little. When they reached a small settlement on a distant planet, Daniel set the ship down near a low platform. "We'll rest here for a while," he said. "You can stretch, eat, and see new things." The girl followed slowly. She had never walked outside a market like that. The settlement was calm. Small buildings made of soft metal and stone. Children playing near their homes and aliens moving gently without rush or noise. She paused near a fountain, the water sparkling under the sun. She touched the cool water with her fingers and felt it slide over her hand. It was different from anything she had experienced in the market. She felt alive in a way she hadn't for a long time. Daniel watched her quietly. He didn't interfere. He knew she needed space, but he stayed near just in case. The first trust had been given. Now it was time to let her explore it slowly. For the first time she laughed, a tiny soft sound. It startled her at first because she didn't remember laughing in a long time. Daniel smiled when he heard it. It was a sound that warmed the room even though they were outside. They spent the day quietly. Daniel fixed his ship. She watched, sometimes helping with small things, handing him tools or holding a part he needed. He praised her softly each time she helped. "Good job," he said. "You're learning fast." Her eyes sparkled with a little pride. She had never been allowed to do anything before. People at the market never gave her a chance. But Daniel treated her like she could matter, and slowly she began to believe it herself. By evening, the settlement was bathed in soft golden light. Daniel prepared a small meal for them. They ate together quietly. The girl didn't talk yet, but she looked at him with a small, tentative smile. It was a start. A small beginning to a relationship built on trust, not fear. That night, as they rested in the small cabin of the ship, the girl held her ribbon tightly and thought of the market. She remembered the faces that had ignored her, the voices that had judged her, and the feeling of being unwanted. But now she felt something new. She felt hope. For the first time in her life, someone had stepped forward. Someone had chosen her, not for what she could do, but for who she was, and that choice began to change her world. Daniel didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if the girl would trust him completely or if she would still be afraid at times. But he knew one thing. He would never let her feel forgotten again. And for the girl, the galaxy didn't seem so cold anymore. The market and its harsh voices were behind her. Ahead there was a new path, and someone walked it with her, slowly, quietly, and with care. For the first time she believed that maybe, just maybe, she could have a place in this vast universe. The next morning, the girl woke to the soft hum of the ship's engines. Sunlight streamed through the small window, casting warm stripes across the floor. For the first time in a long while, she didn't wake with a heavy feeling in her chest. She stretched her arms slowly, feeling the gentle space around her. It was quiet, safe, and hers to move in. Daniel was already awake, checking the ship's instruments. He looked calm, methodical, as if nothing could disturb him. The girl watched him for a few moments. Something about his calm presence made her feel steady too. She still held the ribbon tightly, but now it didn't feel like a chain. It felt like a reminder that someone cared. "Good morning," Daniel said softly, glancing at her. His smile was small, warm, and gentle. The girl didn't answer in words. She simply nodded. That was enough. After breakfast, Daniel said, "We have to visit the settlement nearby. You can see other people, maybe meet some children your age." The girl hesitated. Crowds still made her nervous. The market had taught her to be careful. People could be cruel. She had learned to hide, to stay small, to not speak. But Daniel didn't force her. He simply held the door open and waited. Slowly, she walked beside him. Each step was cautious. The settlement was alive with movement, but not in the harsh way of the market. Children ran in soft patterns, playing games with small, colorful objects. Adults spoke to one another gently. The air smelled of cooked meals, flowers, and fresh water. A small group of children noticed her. They were curious, as children often are, but they didn't rush. One of them, a small alien girl with green-tinted skin, stepped forward. She smiled. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice light and friendly. The girl clutched her ribbon and looked at Daniel. He gave her a small nod. "It's okay. You can try." She took a tiny step forward and murmured something. The words weren't understood, but the tone was soft. The green-skinned girl tilted her head and laughed gently. "You're shy. That's okay. I'm Lyra. Do you want to play?" The girl looked at Daniel again. He smiled and whispered, "It's okay. You can try." The girl slowly stepped forward and joined Lyra. At first, she barely moved, just matching the small gestures of the other girl. But then, after a few minutes, she reached out to catch a bouncing ball. Her fingers touched it, and a small smile appeared on her face. For Daniel, watching her was like seeing a flower finally bloom. He had seen so much hardship in his life, so much fear in the eyes of children who had lost families. But this small smile, fragile yet real, told him that hope could return. The children began to include her in their game. They taught her how to throw the ball, how to laugh when she missed, how to run without fear. She stumbled sometimes, but they clapped and cheered gently. For the first time, she felt like she belonged, even if only for a few moments. Then a sudden problem appeared. A merchant from the market had tracked Daniel's ship. He wanted the girl back, claiming she was part of his stock. He arrived in a loud hovercraft, shouting in a harsh, demanding tone. "Return the girl. She belongs to me." The children froze. Lyra stepped behind the girl. The girl's heart pounded. Fear rose again, thick and fast. She wanted to run back to the quiet corner of the market, where at least nothing was asked of her. But Daniel didn't panic. He stepped in front of her, his presence firm, calm, and steady. "This child is not for sale," Daniel said firmly. His voice didn't shout, but it carried authority. "You cannot take her." The merchant sneered, but Daniel didn't back down. He placed a hand gently on the girl's shoulder. "You're safe with me. I won't let anyone hurt you." The girl felt the strength of those words. Something inside her shifted. She realized that fear didn't have to control her anymore. She could trust him even in this moment of danger. The merchant tried to argue, but the children and some adults from the settlement stood nearby, watching closely. They spoke in a quiet chorus, supporting Daniel. "Leave her alone," one said. "She has a right to safety." Faced with the unexpected support, the merchant grumbled and left. His hovercraft lifted, leaving a trail of dust behind. The girl's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't cry. She looked up at Daniel. He nodded, smiling softly. "See? You're okay." That day, the girl learned something powerful. Kindness was not weakness. Protection was not danger. She realized that not everyone was cruel, and not everyone wanted to use her. There were people, rare but real, who could step forward and care. As evening fell, the settlement glowed under the twin moons of the planet. The children invited her to join their small fire circle. They told stories, shared food, and laughed softly. She listened more than she spoke, but she began to mimic their laughter. Each sound was new, but it felt good. Daniel watched quietly from the edge. He didn't force her to talk or join. He simply let her find her own rhythm in this new life, and she did. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her posture changed. She held her head higher. She moved with more confidence. The weight of being unwanted, of being ignored, started to lift. That night, back in the ship, the girl held her ribbon and looked out the window at the stars. She thought of the market, of the faces that had ignored her, and of the harsh voices that had said she was useless. But she also thought of Daniel, who had stepped forward when no one else would. She whispered softly in her own language, a sound filled with gratitude and hope. Daniel heard it and smiled quietly. He didn't ask her to repeat it or explain it. He simply understood. For the first time, she felt like her life was hers to live, not just a day of survival in a market, not just hours of being ignored, but moments she could shape, explore, and grow into. And Daniel, the human who had chosen her, would walk that path with her. The breakthrough wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't a battle won with weapons or a storm weathered. It was the quiet realization that she could belong somewhere, with someone who cared. That realization was stronger than anything she had ever felt. And as she finally drifted to sleep, the stars outside her window seemed to shine a little brighter. For the first time, the galaxy felt full of possibilities, not threats. The next morning, the girl woke to soft sunlight spilling across the ship's cabin. She stretched and looked around. The ribbon on her wrist felt lighter now. She realized that she wasn't just holding on to it for comfort anymore. It was a reminder of her first step toward hope. Daniel was already awake, sitting quietly at the control panel. He noticed her watching him and smiled gently. "Good morning," he said. "Ready for a new day?" She nodded quietly. Words still didn't come easily, but her small nod carried meaning. She had learned that sometimes actions spoke louder than words. Daniel prepared a small breakfast while she explored the ship. She touched the metal walls, ran her fingers along the edges of the seats, and looked at the small tools neatly arranged on the table. Everything here felt organized, safe, and steady. She had never experienced such order in the chaos of the market. After breakfast, Daniel suggested a small trip outside the settlement. "I want you to see more of the world," he said. "You can learn, explore, and meet people who will care." The girl hesitated for a moment. She had been hurt by so many before, but she felt a quiet courage now, a strength she had never known. She trusted Daniel. Slowly, she followed him out of the ship. The settlement was alive in a calm, gentle way. Children ran and laughed. Adults spoke softly to one another. Small gardens grew beside homes, filled with bright flowers. The air smelled of fresh water, herbs, and baked food. For the first time, the girl felt that the world could be a safe place. Daniel introduced her to some of the locals. "This is my friend," he said. "She's learning our ways and exploring with me." The girl bowed slightly, a small gesture of respect. The people smiled and welcomed her. No one judged her. No one ignored her. She began to understand that there were places where she could belong. Later, they walked to a small playground. Lyra and her friends were there waiting. The girl ran to join them without hesitation this time. She threw the ball, laughed when it bounced wrong, and caught it when it came her way. Lyra clapped, cheering softly. The girl smiled, a real, confident smile that reached her eyes. Daniel watched from a distance, his heart warm. He had never seen her laugh like this before. She was no longer the silent, hidden child from the market. She was becoming someone full of life, someone capable of joy. As the day moved on, Daniel guided her through lessons about the settlement and the galaxy beyond. He showed her maps, explained the stars, and told stories of distant planets. She listened carefully, asking questions with gestures and small words she had learned. Her curiosity grew, and Daniel encouraged it. By evening, they returned to the ship. The sky glowed with the colors of two setting suns, painting everything in shades of orange, pink, and purple. The girl sat by the window, holding her ribbon and staring at the horizon. She thought of the market, of the harsh voices of the merchants who had ignored her, but those memories no longer made her feel small. They were behind her. Daniel joined her by the window. "You've come a long way," he said softly. "You're stronger than you think." The girl looked at him. She still didn't speak much, but her eyes said everything. Gratitude, trust, hope. For the first time, she realized that she had a future, a life where she could be safe, cared for, and even happy. Days passed and she continued to grow more confident. She learned to help Daniel with small tasks on the ship. She arranged tools, helped with supplies, and even learned some words in his language. Each small success filled her with pride. She also began to make friends in the settlement. Children invited her to games, taught her their songs, and shared stories of their lives. She listened, laughed, and slowly told parts of her own story. Each word, each gesture, built connections she had never known before. One evening, Daniel and the girl sat together outside the ship. The stars above were bright and clear. The girl held her ribbon, thinking about everything that had happened. She realized how far she had come, from a silent, unwanted child at a market to someone who had a friend, a protector, and a place to belong. Daniel noticed her quiet reflection. "You've changed a lot," he said. "And you'll keep changing. You'll learn, grow, and explore. The galaxy is big and it's yours too." The girl looked up at him, her eyes full of trust. She didn't need to say it aloud, but she felt it deep inside. She was finally safe. She had someone who would always step forward, who would never let her feel forgotten. That night, as the twin moons rose in the sky, she held her ribbon close and whispered softly in her own language. It was not a sound of fear or sadness, but of hope and gratitude. She had survived the market, the rejection, and the loneliness. And now, she had a future. The days that followed were filled with quiet lessons, laughter, and small adventures. She learned to trust others, to speak more, to explore more. Each step forward was a victory, each smile a triumph over her past. The human who had chosen her, who had stepped forward when no one else would, became more than a protector. He became a guide, a teacher, and a friend. Together, they navigated a universe full of challenges, wonders, and new beginnings. And in that vast galaxy, the girl found something priceless. She found belonging. She found courage. She found the truth that being wanted and cared for could change everything. She was no longer the forgotten child at the alien market. She was someone who mattered, someone who could shine, and someone whose life had been transformed by the simple act of one human stepping forward. For the first time, she believed completely that the world could be kind, that people could care, and that even in the darkest places, hope could bloom. And so her journey continued, not as a frightened child, but as a girl ready to live, to grow, and to embrace the galaxy with the courage she had never known she possessed.